3 people are dead because of the conduct and the actions of this man, James Ray. They are dead because he intentionally used heat to create an altered state, and he was criminally reckless about the consequences. To use the words of the manslaughter statute, they are dead because James Ray consciously disregarded a substantial and unjustifiable risk that his conduct would cause death. And that is why he is guilty of 3 counts of manslaughter.
However, I don't want you grounded here. I want you off balance. Balance is bogus anyway.
By the time they entered the sweat lodge, they were tired, hungry, exhausted, mentally weak, fully conditioned to follow the defendant's directions, and that they trusted he would keep them safe. As Lori Gennari testified, she said, certainly, everything we did was all about getting an order to do something uncomfortable and doing it. We were well trained by the end of the week. The head shaving event, in which both Kirby and James Shore participated, was symbolic of playing full on. The code of silence and the samurai game taught participants and the victims to obey the defendant, and that there are consequences for your teammates if you disobeyed him. The vision quest, 36 hours without food or water and confinement to a small circle, reinforced following the defendant's instructions in order to get the most from the event. It also, without a doubt, weakened the physical state of both Kirby and James as they entered the defendant's heat event without relief in the back of the tent. Stephen Ray, who passed out, you'll recall he was seated between the 3 to 6 position. He passed out during the ceremony and was dragged out afterwards and helicoptered up to Flagstaff. He testified that his trust in Mr. Ray was the only thing that allowed him to believe he could survive the rigors of the sweat lodge. Part of the reason I went in there, knowing how uncomfortable I was, he said, was that I truly trusted my knowledge of how much control he had over everything, and that he wouldn't let anyone get hurt. While participants who were conscious and able to move were arguably free to leave, at least between rounds, not during a round, many participants were unable to do so by reason of their altered mental status, which is the hallmark of heat stroke, as Dr. Dixon and other doctors testified. Linda told you, if I had been in my right mind, I would have gotten out of there. I don't know why I didn't leave. If I had been thinking professionally, I never would have allowed me to do what I did. It seems that the defendant wants you to believe that this is merely a corporate event that he just shows up for. Who is the president of JRI? It's James Ray. Who is the secretary of JRI? It's James Ray. Who is the treasurer of JRI? It's James Ray. Who is the director? He intended to use the heat to create this altered mental status in order to give the participants something extreme to make them think that they got their money's worth.
Your Honor, I am going to, it is disputed.
And Dennis said, James, I think I died. And do you remember what Mr. Ray replied? Do you remember what he said? According to Dennis, the defendant, with a smile on his face, said, you were reborn. Go take a shower and get cleaned up. There is no question that the victims died of heat stroke or heat exposure. All of the doctors in this case, except the defense doctor, testified it is their conclusion that the 3 victims died as a result of heat stroke or exposure to the heat. Dr. Dixon, the only doctor who has ever treated organophosphate poisoning, would not even hypothetically allow that organophosphates could have caused the deaths in this case. The defense wants you to freeze your knowledge in time to what the first responders and the doctors knew that night. A night when no one imagined that anyone would intentionally subject others to searing heat and humidity for more than 2 hours and ignore those who lay unconscious in his tent. Their list of possible causes of death reads a bit like a takeout menu from an expensive diner. And it's baloney. It's all baloney. Organophosphates, rat poison, ant poison that Mr. Lee bought at Home Depot, brought it in this courtroom, paraded it in front of all of you, even though there's no evidence that that product was ever out at Angel Valley. Weed killer, tainted water, tainted fruit, fruit with flies, soil with pesticides, the tarps, the wood, the wrong wood, the wood with nails, the wood without nails, treated wood, pressure-treated wood, wood sealer, free will, the victims chose to stay in the tent, and the very short-lived other cause defense that Mr. Ray tried to pull on Sergeant Barbaro, that Ted was the one running the sweat lodge. It's ridiculous. The defendant wants you to ignore what is right in front of your eyes. Ignore the waiver that Mr. Ray made everyone sign that essentially acknowledges that the way Mr. Ray does a sweat lodge is dangerous. Fortunately, when you became jurors in this case, you didn't have to check your common sense and your experience at the door. The fact of the matter is, if we had tested for and eliminated organophosphates, they would have come up with some other substance, plutonium, perhaps, that we didn't test for. You have heard evidence that many sweat lodge ceremonies have been conducted in that same sweat lodge at other times, and that the only time participants experience significant distress is when the defendant runs the event. Sweat lodge ceremonies are not inherently dangerous events, as you have heard. Heat endurance challenges, where participants are actually told to ignore their body's signs and symptoms of heat illness, are incredibly dangerous. And certainly the defendant himself that night, like a child caught with his hands in the cookie jar, immediately minimized what he had done. He told Sergeant Barbaro, who questioned him on the scene, that Ted was conducting the sweat lodge, and he told Sergeant Barbaro, well, there were about 40 people inside. That statement shows consciousness of guilt. His conduct inside the sweat lodge, as round after round after round, more and more people got sick. And his conduct about what he did and what he did not do shows you that what was happening is what he intended to happen. But he intended to use that heat to take them up to the edge of death so that they would have this extreme, altered mental experience and think they were getting something for their $10,000. And that's why he doesn't react. That's why he doesn't stop the ceremony when people pass out and are dragged out right in front of him. Scott Barrett then thought he would lie in front of Linda, between Linda and the pit, but was afraid that the defendant would yell at him again. And Scott testified that the defendant could see Linda from his position, but said, just leave her. We need to keep going. Was Liz possibly upset with herself due to the reprimand that she and the others had received from the defendant for drinking wine and maybe disturbing his nap? Was Liz determined inside that tent to prove to the defendant that she was more than that? Possibly. Ms. Tucker, concerned about Liz's condition, told you that she called out to Mr. Ray, James, it's Laura, I'm concerned about Liz. Tucker testified that Mr. Ray did not investigate the situation, did not leave his spot by the door and come over and check up on Liz. Instead, Mr. Ray said, Liz has done this before and she knows what she's doing. And at another time, she heard someone call out, she's not breathing. Ms. Gennari heard Mr. Ray respond, leave her there. We'll deal with it at the end of the round. Dr. Bunn's testimony to you was that she heard a voice. And the voice she heard said, I can't get her to, someone's not breathing. Dr. Bunn told you she heard Mr. Ray respond, door is closed. This round has begun. We'll deal with it after the next round. He has information from Debbie Mercer that 3 people are still down. He, first of all, doesn't get up and go help open the back of the tent to get them out, but secondly, tells Debbie she can only open the back of the tent if it's absolutely necessary. A reasonable person knows that if you spend too much time in a superheated environment, you will die. Mr. Ray told them that it was okay to pass out inside the sweat lodge and that they'd be taken care of. Mr. Ray intentionally weakened them in advance by subjecting them to that 36-hour fast, how he gave his victory wave, how he got hosed off, how he got a drink, and he sat in the shade. Meanwhile, the Dream Team members and the Mercers are dealing with that horrifying chaos. What was happening at that point was okay with Mr. Ray. This is what he expected, and this is what he intended. The Dream Team members, people who had not been part of this event before, described for you how horrifying it was. And what you know, in those first minutes, Mr. Ray was sitting on a chair in the shade drinking water. Mr. Ray, who sat there while all this was going on, with full knowledge of what was going on in the back of the tent, consciously disregarding the risk of death that his conduct created. And Mr. Shore, on the other hand, struggling himself to survive, yet taking care of those around him. From the 6th round on, through this testimony, you have learned what Mr. Shore did and what Mr. Ray did not. Again, what a contrast between teacher and student. How Mr. Shore, who's struggling himself, drags her out to the entrance, right where Mr. Ray is, bumps his head, has that opportunity to get out himself, has that opportunity to get out into the fresh air and be with us today. And what does he do? He's aware that somebody else is in trouble in the back of that tent. And so at the entrance, he turns around and he goes back in. James Shore calls out for help. We need help over here. And again, how Mr. Ray, hearing those words, says the door is closing. And then the opportunity to reverse course was there throughout this event. Why did Mr. Ray not stop? Kirby, James, and Liz all arrived at Angel Valley, full of hope and life. But when Mr. Ray took it upon himself to do this extreme event, when Mr. Ray intentionally used heat to create an altered mental state, telling participants to push through the pain in order to have a breakthrough, Mr. Ray senselessly and recklessly snuffed out the lives of Kirby Brown, James Shore, and Liz Newman. Members of the jury, that is what the crime of manslaughter is all about, recklessly causing the death of another. Thank you.